Am I doing well? Am I where I should be? Am I even on the right track? I seem to be doing pretty good, but what are some blind spots? Where could I be doing better? Is this all going to fall apart tomorrow? These are just some of the questions that we might ask ourselves, and clients have asked me about their current state of their finances. And these questions can eat at individuals and families to make them lack confidence. They might not have the clarity of what direction to go, and ultimately those questions can handcuff people to just keep them in the spot that they are. Just don't acknowledge it. Just push it to the side. Or worse yet, let it fester, and then something really does happen that puts them to the test and they don't pass. And ultimately, what I find is that many people are looking for clarity, they're looking for confidence, and they're looking for a path to help them achieve financial success. It doesn't necessarily need to be Elon Musk financial success. It just might mean that they can live a little bit more comfortably or retire a little bit early. Now, this is the paradox for high income earners. You're going along, battling through your 20s, finding that job, start hitting your stride in your 30s, get married, have kids, get that job that really pays like you think you should pay, and you think you've made it. And in your mind, you're saying, I just need to get to that next level and everything's going to be just right. But the reality is when we get to that next level, complexity opens up. You might get stock options, might buy a rental property, might become a business owner. You might have all of these things that are going on, and it hasn't made life easier by making more money. In fact, it's made things more unclear. It's made things more challenging, and a way that you yearn for those days in your 20s where you're only worried about making that paycheck so you can go have fun on the weekends. At least that's what I was doing. And in the end, a lot of folks that are in this situation, they lack the clarity, they lack the confidence, and they might have the nice house, but they still feel handcuffed. So what I did is I've created a tool that allows you to create a multidimensional view of your current financial situation. Think about it. We track everything. I track my sleep, how many steps that I took, how many calories I burned, how many calories I took in, what I weigh, my body fat percentage, how fast I can run 5K, all of these things. We track them, but very rarely are we tracking what's going on inside of our personal financial situation. So that's exactly what this does. It helps us create a baseline. Where are you today? Where are some things that you're doing really well? But gosh, where there are some areas that maybe you have some blind spots. And oftentimes most people in this situation feel like they need to go through some extravagant financial planning process, or it's just behind the paywall, or it's just a little bit out of reach, or maybe it just seems a little too complex. And that is why I built the wealth score for my folks that I've run into. Every day I talk to folks that are in that sweet spot, the kind of the messy middle, the sandwich generation, however you want to put it. They are the Henrys. They're earning a lot of money, but maybe they haven't quite put enough away. They're not quite sure where they stand. And I think in the end, if we can create some clarity through the wealth score assessment, we can ultimately get you to feel much more confident in your path forward, or at least having the right areas to focus on. Because if you're constantly just focusing on building your net worth, there are a whole slew of other areas that probably need some work as well. So why did I build the wealth score? What I've found is I've been doing this for about 17 years, and there are a lot of information out on the internet. There is a slew of calculators that you can use. You can go project how much you're going to have in retirement. You can figure out how much life insurance you have. You can find out all of these things, what a mortgage might be today and what that payment might look like. You can find all of this stuff. But what's challenging is they're all disparate. They're all separated in different parts. And then most people have to engage with a financial advisor like myself to actually go through some hardcore planning. And that's awesome. But I know that a lot of people in this demographic, this 35 to 55-year-old, they don't have the time. They don't want to make the time. They want to spend more time planning their vacation than they want on their financial plan. And this is why I built this. I want to create some easy to use, simple to go through, takes less than 10 minutes, and you get a pretty good idea of where you are. Now, maybe the numbers aren't going to be exact, but directionally, where are they going? Is there some areas that we can get identification on maybe where we can do better. And so what I've done is through this, I've identified some really core issues within the wealth world. Now, when I was building this scoring mechanism, going through the assessment, I looked on the Federal Reserve has this really cool spreadsheet that you can dive into, and it looks at everybody across the United States, and it looks at their net worth and where they should be and all these things. And what I found is that actually is really not that helpful for a lot of my clients. I'm just using this as an example that a lot of my clients are in that top 10% of income earners. So they're in the 90th decile, they're doing really well, and those Federal Reserve numbers actually kind of overstate where they are. So what that does is that gives people overconfidence on their financial situation when they are in that very high level of net worth, and maybe it actually isn't quite that case. So what I did is I use the Millionaire Next Door framework. So it's using your income in age relative to your net worth to give you a little bit more sense of where you stand relative to your net worth. And what's really cool is you can find some fun insights on where your net worth is relative to your income, because sometimes maybe your net worth doesn't reflect that. Maybe there's a little bit of a discrepancy, but that also could be related to the fact that maybe you just got the promotion. Now you're making 300, but your net worth doesn't necessarily reflect that quite yet. So there's some things that you can work on. Maybe it's your savings rate. Maybe it's your putting away more for retirement. Maybe it's managing your cash flows. So there's all these things that we can look at from an income standpoint relative to your cash flows, relative to your net worth, that we can then create some interesting insights across all of those that we can connect dots that maybe weren't connected before. And what I find is that this tool, this assessment, fills a lot of gaps. So what it does is it looks at things, independently. So it looks at, what your income is, what's your take-home pay, how much are you spending on your debts and liabilities, what's your savings rates, things of that nature. So it's a multi-dimensional score that's specifically built for people that are in that higher income area. So, making, $250,000, $300,000 a year, not exactly for them. I mean, it can be for people on the fringes as well, but also really awesome for folks that are in that core area that are, trying to understand what everything looks like. So this is, again, why I built it, is to create the clarity, create the confidence so people can start making some better decisions. Because again, I've seen this time and time again. They've done some planning. They got the life insurance policies when they first had kids, but that was 6-7 years ago. Their income's doubled since then. They have taken on a new home, and all of a sudden they're sitting with the same life insurance policies that they had, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago. Well, that might not be where they need to be, or they've never looked at their disability. They just sign up for what they have available to them through their employer. These are all areas that we could have some serious blind spots. So who is this for? And frankly, who is this not for? I built this really with the core client that I work with in mind. That 35 to 55-year-old, they tend to be in that top 10% of income earners, which here in Colorado is about $250,000 or more. Dual income usually, but not always. They have done some planning, but they've never really engaged with an advisor directly, or maybe they have. Maybe it's their parents' advisor, and they're like, that's just never jived with me. They're just trying to figure out some direction in their life. And I think that this is a really great place for a lot of people. And I find that a lot of people are in this space of, what do we do next? How do we do this? Are we taken care of? We can start answering some of those questions that are gnawing at them, that wake them up in the middle of the night. And I think that it mostly resonates for a lot of those dual income families with kids that have a mortgage. So I don't know, some might call that a bit more of a traditional type of setup. They got married in their early 30s, late 20s, early 30s. They then, a couple years later had a couple kids, and now they're dealing with all the stuff. So they're raising children. They're trying to handle, potentially in this case, mom and dad getting older, growing children. So they've got this sandwich generation that's kind of affecting them. And it's just a real challenge. And they oftentimes want to say, you know what, I'm going to do the planning, but I'm going to get onto that tomorrow. And it's like the old adage when you go to the bar and they've got the sandwich sign up in front and they say free beer tomorrow. Right? It's obviously a tongue-in-cheek, but I oftentimes see that with clients as it relates to their financial planning is they're going to do it tomorrow. Tomorrow. And then when they get to retirement, they wish they had done it yesterday. and the day before. So who is this not for? I would really say that this is probably not for folks that are nearing, within a year or two of retirement, over 60. It's really probably not for those folks that are, just starting out, 24, 25 years old, getting their first job, first starting to make money. Probably not great for them because it probably doesn't tell them a lot. It doesn't signal a lot of the stuff that you're looking for, and probably you might even look at the numbers and get a little freaked out because you need some time. You need some time to build. You need some of these factors. With the retirees, probably doesn't give enough time for, okay, what do we need to do? It doesn't account for some of the specific issues that retirees deal with. This doesn't account for, what kind of Medicare plan or if you need long-term care, things like that. It also probably isn't great for the ultra high net worth individuals. So those folks over, $15, $20 million in net worth, probably not super good for them. A lot of the times with those folks, it's, they kind of have it figured out. It's more behavioral issues that they've got to sort through. Financial stuff is going to kind of take care of itself. Obviously, we've seen a lot of people, athletes, people inheriting money, they blow through it. This is probably not real great for them in that sense. But I think in the end, the folks that are looking to build wealth, they're 35, 55 years old, somewhere in that range, have a couple, 3 kids, and life just is complicated. They've got a lot going on. They've got a lot of irons in the fire, and they want to figure out what to do, how to do it, and what's the best strategy. How do they optimize? We're constantly trying to optimize our health, our well-being, and they want to constantly optimize their financial situation. This is a great tool to give some light to that optimization opportunity. So what is the wealth score? What does it actually do? So what we do is we break down 5 core categories. We look at your net worth, we look at your cash flow, we look at savings and investing, we look at your retirement readiness, and then finally we look at protection. And sprinkled in there, there's both qualitative things and quantitative things. So things that we kind of feel, what's going to go on, what's your confidence level, things like that. And then there's some, things that we're actually getting. So what is your income? What's your take-home pay? What are you putting away for retirement? What's your debts? What's your debt payments? Things like that. So those are some of the awesome parts of what we actually capture. So in under 10 minutes, you can go through, it's anywhere between 20 and 25 questions, depending on, how you answer them. Some questions will take you into a different route if you say yes, and then we'll have to get some more detail. But 20 to 25 questions, very simple. You don't need to pull out statements. You don't need to look at your last year's taxes. There's a whole, it's just very simple. If you got a pretty good high level idea of your current financial situation, yeah, we could probably answer it in about, just under 10 minutes. You might need to chase down a couple details here and there, but overall, very simple, very basic approach, and frankly, might be a good opportunity for you to look at and say, what do I actually need to start looking at? What are maybe some things I haven't opened up? When was the last time you opened the 401k? Oh my gosh, look at the balance, it's higher or lower, things like that. So inside of that, we then rate and weight these different things. So for example, we weight retirement relative to your score at 30%. So it's a pretty heavy score as it relates to the other pieces and parts of the puzzle. And the reason for that is retirement readiness is really, really important. You're 35, you're 40, you're 45, 50, you think about the last 15, 20 years of your life. Oh my gosh, it seems like it was yesterday that I was, walking the halls of my high school or just graduating college, and you just look up and you've got gray on your beard like I do. And you think, in your heart you feel young, but the reality is, 15, 20 years goes by like a blink of an eye. So we think about retirement readiness is, okay, the next 10, 15, 20 years is going to go as quickly as the last 20. And frankly, if you think about some of those milestones, it's probably going to be as complicated or more complicated over the next 15, 20 years. So retirement readiness, where you are today, is really important in how we scale and score the overall, your wealth score. That's a pretty big one. We look at protection probably as the least impactful as far as the weighting of the wealth score, but certainly something that we've got to account for. So what's your life insurance? What's your disability? Things like that. And then we compile all of these and we give you a score, just like you might get in school. We build it on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being the best and 0 being the worst, and then figuring out where that matches. And again, we look at this both from an age-based approach as well as income-based approach. So it's not just this cookie cutter approach where, a 35-year-old is getting compared to the same level as a 55-year-old from a net worth standpoint, or that same individual that doesn't have maybe the insurability requirements that they might have elsewhere, they're not going to get counted against and things like that. So we look at those things relative to each other, and then we connect the dots. So we look at these 13 different metrics that are under the surface, and we'll go through them fairly deep. And then the cool thing is that when you get the report, we're going to go through that here in a moment, is walk you through an actual demo of what this looks like and go through and say, okay, this is how this works. We then can create the dots of how this connects. On top of that, it's also really cool because you can actually say what would be good for a planning conversation, what might be good for the next steps. So that's where you can either take this to your own advisor, or you can schedule some time with 4 Points Wealth, and we can actually go through that and connect the dots and give you some high level connection points to your current wealth score. And then this is the cool thing, we can do it over and over time. So it's like you got it today, and then we can check in a year from now. What's your wealth score? Did you do the life insurance that we talked about? Did you maybe save a little bit more? Did you invest a bit more? Did you make that emergency fund a little bit more healthy? Things like that. Maybe you drop some debts. Those are all some really cool things that you can do as it relates to enhancing your wealth score, optimizing your financial situation, and in the end, putting yourself on a better path to achieve financial success. And I think this is a fun part because we look at like lifestyle. So we look at your retirement situation, again, not just generically, we look at relative to what your income might need in the future. And so there's a whole slew of factors that play to this. So it's super fun. I had an amazing time of building this. And I think that this is actually maybe a good point, is the way that we built this. And I think today, it's been an amazing journey with the last 4 years in AI. I think there's a lot of worry about what it's going to do. I built this using vibe coding and some other stuff on the back end. So it was all the knowledge that I have for the last 17 years of personal wealth, and being able to put it into a system and then generate a tool that can be very useful and impactful for the clients that will, or for the folks that end up taking this. So I think that that's super fun. So I'm going to switch gears here and share a live demo of what this plan, what it looks like going actually through an example situation, and ultimately what the report looks like. So I'm going to share my screen now. So here we are. We are going to start this. So it's 4pointswealth.com/wealth score. We're going to get my wealth score. All right, so we jump in, we'll begin the assessment. So in this case, we're just going to go through, I've built this, started walking through this. So 35 to 44 years old. And what we do is, this is kind of fun. We use midpoints. So we don't have exact dates, data. That's probably going to be in our second scope of building this out. But, we use age ranges, number ranges, things like that. So again, not exact detail, but I don't think we actually need, I don't think we can get too much in the weeds if we have too many exact details and say we're off by a penny or two, or even a couple $1,000. But if we can see directionally, are we in the right place? That's, I think, really helpful. So 35 to 50 or 44, married, filed jointly. So they're married, they've got 3 dependents. So this might be a little bit of a challenge if they've got, they're under 18. So I'm sure they're, planning for college, maybe dealing with summer camps, buying ski passes, things like that. These folks, they want to retire between 60 and 65. So, they've got a few years, about 20 years till retirement. And yes, they are a business owner. So what is their annual gross income? So basically what ends up on your tax return. So in this case, these folks we're going to put them $250,000 to $400,000. And then what are their sources of household income? So they get a W-2 salary and they get some business distributions. All right, roughly how much lands in your household bank account each month from regular income? So this is just what I find is your net income. So that's what really matters when we start budgeting. Gross income, we can use that for certain figures, but this, what lands in your account? I think that really makes a lot of sense. So we're going to say $18,000 to $25,000, and then your total retirement contributions. So they've had some adjustments in their working situation there. So right now they're about 6 to 10% they get with an employee match. All right, outside of retirement accounts, approximately how much do you save in a typical year? So you put 6 to 10% in your 401k. So what else out there? In this case, they put about $1,000 a month away, maybe $2,000 a month away. So they're about $10,000 to $25,000 a year. And how much do they spend on a typical month? So we're going to say $10,000 to $15,000. So that seems pretty reasonable. But what are their total monthly debt payments? In this case, they're going to have a mortgage and then they're going to have some car payments. So that's about $4,000 to $6,000. What is their total net worth? So in this situation, we're going to just say they've got a net worth of $500,000 to $750,000. All right, how much do they have in cash savings? So we're going to point here, they've got $10,000 to $25,000 in cash. And what are their non-investments? So not cash. So this is not retirement funds or not cash. Let's say they've got $50,000 to $150,000 in non-retirement. Do you have any stock options or equity compensation? So we're going to say no to that. What is your total outstanding debt? So if you got mortgage payments, you've got car loans. So let's just say these folks have $300,000 to $600,000 in outstanding debt balance, and they've got a mortgage. They've got a home equity line of credit, and they've got an outstanding car loan. And now, how much life insurance coverage do they have? Well, it's been a few years, but I think they've got about $500,000 to $1 million. Do they have any disability? Yep, they've got some through an employer. It's only about $4,000 to $6,000 a month, though. And then, what is approximate current value of your retirement savings? So they've got $150,000 to $350,000. How do they feel about their current financial situation? So I'm going to go with neutral. I'm not sure where I stand. So we're almost done here. All right, so it's as simple as that. That took just a few minutes. And where should we send it? So you just put in your name and your email address. So I'm just going to put Taylor. So this is my personal email. I don't know if that's the right thing to do. And then we calculate my score. So this is what you'll get straight out of the. So in this case, we're developing. So they get a 60 out of 100. So you might be like, oh man, what does that mean? So we'll actually go through what that looks like. So this is, categorized as a C. So not exactly related to the scale that we use in school, but we generate that this is a developing plan. So that means that there's some good things and there's some things that we can work on. And then we look at the category breakdown. So these are those 5 categories, but in the report that you get that we'll email you, it's going to break down all of those different metrics that we talked about, the various details. So it's going to break each one of these down into, other little smaller parts. So again, net worth looking great. Their net worth is on track, relative to their age and their income. Their cash flow is looking good, so that might be an interesting opportunity there. Their savings and investments down a little bit. We might have an opportunity to bolster that. So there might be, maybe it's they're newly minted, making $250,000, and maybe they haven't quite got to the level of saving that they'd like. They're trying to work through some things, or gosh, maybe right now they're sending 3 kids to daycare or private school or something like that. I might know that by personal situation, and they're just not really able to save as much as they possibly could. Well, retirement, this is an area that they could use a lot of work on. So we want to make sure that we focus some efforts on, well, what are we doing right here? What are some opportunities that we could maybe bolster their retirement readiness? And then finally, protection. Again, probably a little underfunded. Again, probably a little time that they've gone where they haven't reevaluated where they are from a retirement or from a protection standpoint. So maybe we need to look at either their life insurance or their disability. So then we just have a quick key insight. So what are some basic insights that we've kind of looked at? Again, with your neutral situation, they're not really sure. And are they ready to close the gap? So an opportunity to schedule some time to review this, go through it with with me, a CFP, or somebody on our team. So right there, great. This is going to then get emailed to you, and you're going to get this score report. This is going to break it down individually. So you'll notice that this personalized wealth score report going to talk about the exact same thing that we just reviewed. You're developing, you got a score of 65, fantastic. We looked at all of those numbers there, but now this is really where the rubber meets the road. You can actually see what's going on. So your net worth is approximately 179% of the income adjusted target for your group, so you're looking great. What's your cash flow buffer? So in this case, they're looking great. So you can say that your buffer is about 35% of your take home, which that basically means that you're not spending everything that comes in. So this also then could relate to that savings and investment piece. Maybe money's just stacking up in the checking account and you're not sure what to do with it. Your debt to income ratio, fantastic position. So what we'll account is your debt to income is about 18% of your gross monthly income. So what that looks at is take your gross income divided by 12, and then we look at that relative to your debt payments. This is actually a really great place to look at because this is how they calculate if you can get a mortgage, as an example. Not a lot of people are comfortable with what the mortgage level allows, which I think is like something like 42%. So at this level, you know that you have ample coverage between where you are and kind of your gross income. So again, we'll go through this and what this signals for you. Your emergency fund, looking pretty good. So again, maybe there's an opportunity if you're in a really good spot. Do we now divert money from your emergency fund to maybe other savings? That's certainly something that we could look at. Again, total savings rate. This is an area that I think we could look at. We're calling this adequate, but I think we have an opportunity to really increase that. And then your investments to net worth. So we look at your investment level. So basically, I take this as a liquidity. How liquid are you? If you have too much of your net worth tied into illiquid assets, that could be a challenge if something were to happen. I saw this during, post GFC or global financial crisis, and that was, where people had too much of their money in illiquid assets and just decimated them from a financial standpoint. So we look at your investments to net worth. If this is a little bit off kilter, something that we might need to address. And then we look at the retirement readiness. Where are they right now? Are they on, if there's a significant gap in their retirement plan or on their progress? And then ultimately, then we look at their protection. So life insurance coverage, where do they stand? What does this look like? And then ultimately we look at, what a planning conversation. So if you're a business owner, that might come up here. You might want to look at your protection. If you've got young kids, what does an education funding strategy look like? So ultimately, this is some areas that would be great for having a conversation around the planning, what that looks like, and how the wealth score doesn't just take it from a piece of paper. There are actually some actionable items that you can apply to your current financial situation and make everything look a lot better. So there we are. I walked through a live demo of actually taking the assessment and walked through a report of how it works. So how do we use this? Let's put it all in context. So what does a B look like relative to an F? And how do you get from or even in this case, how do you go from a C to a B? Well, I think if we got retirement a little bit more dialed in, it's, what a low score looks like. It's not failure. There are opportunities. As we looked at, I think this is where if this individual said, I'm doing great from a net worth standpoint, everything else is going to take care of itself. Well, maybe not. What if they didn't do anything to their retirement and all of a sudden in 15, 20 years, they're behind the eight ball, they don't know what to do. But gosh, their net worth looks good. Well, that doesn't say everything. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to be focused on is, just having a lower grade than you expect doesn't necessarily mean that's failure. There's just an opportunity. Just like in the gym, if you're, trying to run a marathon, well, you need to start somewhere. You need to have some goal. You need to have some target. And I think in the end, with the way that we structure this, it gives you insights. It gives you enough detail without, just leaving you high and dry. And this is where having a conversation with an advisor, with me, to go through this individual plan for you or through your assessment with you gives you some ideas of maybe this is where you can have some low-hanging fruit, easy to attack, easy to take care of, and it's a great way for people to go through. Or does it make sense to go through a more in-depth, go into the details of where things stand? And we can talk about what the financial planning relationship looks like, how we go through this, build out the scope of plan. And this is where I think having a conversation is really helpful for a lot of people that have gone through this, that have had that initial report and maybe been a little surprised by certain areas. And what we do is we schedule a meeting, just go through a 30-minute meeting, talk through some of the details, maybe bring some color to the situation. Maybe it's not exactly what it appears. They can talk through it. And in the end, we can figure out what's the best path for them to move forward with the most confidence, with the most clarity. And I think what we ultimately come down to is, what is the cost of not knowing? At the end of the day, if you go walking around, you've got these questions nagging at you, you're letting them fester and you're not taking any action. The cost of doing that is remarkable. When I was early in my career, I sat and I did hundreds of Social Security seminars, hundreds of them. And I found some really unbelievable stories. And one of the things that has sat with me for years is conversations that I had with people that are in their early 60s. They sit down and they don't really have a lot to show for all their hard work. And they never set a plan. They never really put anything to invest. They finally have the gall to come in and they muster up the courage and they come and sit down and they start talking and life happened. this, divorce, kid to college, then they helped out this, and all of a sudden these things happen and they culminate, and they always walked away saying, gosh, I wish I had talked to you 20 years ago. I wish I'd talked to you 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Don't let time eat away at what's possible today. Take the steps, take the wealth score, easy. Spend the 5-10 minutes that it takes to go through the assessment. Get a better idea of where you stand today. Do it with confidence, do it with clarity, and then figure out what you need to do to then create a better situation. Maybe there's some blind spots that you didn't see. Maybe it's time that you set up a meeting with a certified financial planner like myself. Maybe you need to take this to your advisor and say, hey, what are we doing about this? All of these things are hyper important to make sure that you are on the best path for your financial journey, that you aren't going to hit any surprises along the way. And in the end, you have the clarity, confidence, and the path forward to create financial success for you and your family. Go to 4pointswealth.com/wealth score to start the wealth score process. If you need to schedule some time, there will be a link for my Calendly. You can schedule time at whatever most convenient for you. You can schedule 30 minutes to go through your wealth score and figure out the best plan of action to make sure you're filling those gaps and you're doing it with confidence.